So let's start. Number 10. The oldest DNA. Today, northern Greenland looks almost completely lifeless. It's a polar desert of ice, rock, and freezing winds. But around 2 million years ago, this same region looked nothing like it does today. In 2022, scientists recovered environmental DNA from sediments in northern Greenland's Cap Copenhagen Formation. The DNA was around 2 million years old, at the time, the oldest environmental DNA ever recovered. But the remarkable part wasn't simply its age. It was what the DNA revealed. The genetic fragments belonged to plants and animals that once lived in an ancient Arctic ecosystem. There were traces of poplar, birch, and thuja trees, along with shrubs and grasses. There was DNA from reindeer, rodents, geese, and perhaps most surprisingly, mastodons. The landscape appears to have been an open boreal forest, with conditions dramatically warmer than those found in northern Greenland today. Scientists weren't looking at a frozen animal preserved perfectly in ice. They were looking at microscopic fragments of genetic material that had become trapped in ancient sediments. And somehow, those fragments survived for roughly 2 million years. The DNA was preserved partly because it became attached to mineral surfaces inside the sediment, protecting it from the processes that normally destroy genetic material. That means a few microscopic traces of DNA were enough to reconstruct an ecosystem that disappeared long before modern humans existed. Number 9. The oldest water. Around 3 kilometers beneath the surface of Canada, scientists encountered something that had been isolated from the modern world for an extraordinary length of time. Water. Not water frozen in ice. Not water trapped inside a glacier. Water hidden deep inside the Earth's crust. At the Kidd Creek mine in Ontario, researchers studied ancient groundwater that had been isolated for roughly 2 billion years. Its chemistry was radically different from ordinary surface water. It was extremely salty and contained dissolved gases and elements that allowed scientists to investigate how long the water had remained isolated. The age doesn't mean that every individual molecule has been sitting there completely untouched for 2 billion years. Instead, scientists are looking at the geological and chemical history of the fluid system and the time since this ancient water became isolated from the surface. And that distinction matters, because the real mystery isn't simply how old the water is. It's what that water tells us about life deep inside Earth. The chemistry showed that reactions between water and surrounding rocks can generate chemical energy. And that is important because some microorganisms living deep beneath Earth's surface don't depend directly on sunlight. They can obtain energy from chemical reactions occurring in the rocks and fluids around them. So far beneath the surface, where sunlight never reaches, environments may still exist that can support microbial ecosystems. The ancient water beneath Canada, therefore, isn't just a geological curiosity. It is a glimpse into a hidden part of Earth, where the boundary between geology and biology becomes surprisingly difficult to define. 2 billion years old, and still moving through the cracks of our planet. Number 8. The oldest human footprints. There are ancient fossils that tell us what our ancestors looked like. There are ancient bones that tell us how their bodies evolved. But footprints tell us something different. They show us how they moved. At Laetoli in Tanzania, scientists discovered a set of footprints preserved in volcanic ash. They were made around 3.66 million years ago. And unlike bones, these impressions capture a moment. For a brief period, an early member of the human lineage walked across soft volcanic material. Then the ash hardened, and the footprints remained for millions of years. The Laetoli footprints are widely accepted as some of the oldest unequivocal evidence of habitual upright walking in the human lineage. The strange thing about a footprint is that it feels temporary. You step on wet sand, and a footprint can disappear within minutes. But under exactly the right geological circumstances, a footprint can become something else, a permanent record, a moment frozen in stone. And at Laetoli, that moment survived for 3.66 million years. Number 7. The oldest material from the solar system. Some of the oldest material ever found on Earth wasn't actually created on Earth. It came from the birth of the solar system. Around 4.567 billion years ago, the young sun was surrounded by a rotating disk of gas and dust. Tiny particles began coming together. Some eventually became planets. Others became asteroids and comets. And a few of those ancient materials survived almost unchanged. Scientists can find them today inside primitive meteorites. Among the oldest known components are tiny structures called calcium aluminum-rich inclusions, or CAIs. Some of these grains date to around 4.567 billion years. That's roughly the age scientists assign to the solar system itself. Inside them are microscopic pieces of material that formed before the planets had fully assembled. Scientists can measure radioactive isotopes inside these grains and use their decay to determine their age. It's effectively a geological clock, and the result takes us back to the earliest moments of our planetary system. Before Earth had oceans, before it had continents, before there was an atmosphere capable of supporting the world we know, there was simply a cloud of material orbiting a young star. From that material came the planets. And inside meteorites, some of the original ingredients still remain.
Early solar system.
So when scientists examine one of these microscopic inclusions, they're not merely looking at an old mineral. They're examining material that existed before Earth itself had finished forming. Number 6, the oldest crystal. In Western Australia, scientists discovered zircon crystals that formed around 4.404 billion years ago. These crystals came from the Jack Hills region, and they are extraordinary time capsules because Earth's oldest surviving rocks are not nearly as old as the planet itself. Most of the original crust was destroyed or transformed through billions of years of geological activity, but zircon is remarkably durable. It can survive geological recycling while preserving chemical information from the time it originally crystallized. One particular zircon was dated to approximately 4.404 billion years. That means it formed only a few hundred million years after Earth itself came together. The planet was still recovering from the violent conditions of its formation, yet inside a tiny crystal, scientists found evidence that the early Earth may already have had a crust interacting with liquid water. And that's what makes zircon so valuable. It isn't simply an old object, it's a record. Number 5, the oldest convincing evidence of life. One of the strongest examples comes from Western Australia's Pilbara region. The Dresser Formation is around 3.48 billion years old. Inside these ancient rocks are stromatolites and other structures associated with microbial activity. Stromatolites are layered mineral structures produced when microbial communities grow, trap sediment, and gradually build up layers. Modern stromatolites still exist in a few environments today. But the ancient examples are extraordinary because they provide evidence of life operating on a planet that was almost unimaginably different. The Dresser Formation also preserves evidence of ancient hot springs. That means some of Earth's earliest convincing evidence for life on land may have come from environments resembling volcanic geothermal systems. Tiny microbial communities were already altering their surroundings billions of years before anything resembling modern life appeared. The first chapters of Earth's biological history were written by organisms too small to see, and their signatures are still preserved in stone. Number 4, the oldest ice. In 2025, the International Beyond Epoca project successfully drilled a roughly 2 800-meter-long ice core at Little Dome Sea in East Antarctica. The core contains ice dating back at least 1.2 million years, and hidden inside that ice is something even more valuable: ancient air. As snow accumulated year after year, it gradually compressed into ice. Tiny bubbles of atmosphere became trapped inside it. Those bubbles contain samples of Earth's ancient atmosphere, carbon dioxide, other greenhouse gases, and chemical information that can help scientists reconstruct past environmental conditions. So when researchers analyze a piece of ancient ice, they're not simply examining frozen water, they're examining a sealed atmospheric archive, a sample of the air that existed hundreds of thousands of years before modern civilization. The timing is especially important. Number 3, the oldest known rock. Almost all of those ancient rocks have been destroyed. but a surviving fragment from the earliest chapter of Earth's geological history. That's what makes the Acasta gneiss in Canada's Northwest Territories so extraordinary. Parts of the Acasta gneiss formed around 4.03 billion years ago. Scientists determined its age through isotopic dating, particularly using minerals containing uranium that gradually decays into lead. The ratio between those elements acts like a geological clock, and the clock points back more than 4 billion years. At that time, Earth was still incredibly young. The planet had formed roughly 4.56 billion years ago, so the Acasta gneiss formed within the first several hundred million years of Earth's existence. But here's the problem. Earth doesn't preserve its crust very well. Plate tectonics constantly moves and recycles rocks. Old crust gets buried, heated, deformed, melted, and eventually incorporated into new geological material. That's why finding rocks this old is so difficult. The Acasta gneiss survived, although it has been heavily metamorphosed, transformed by intense heat and pressure. Parts of its original history remain encoded in its minerals. Number 2. The oldest living tree. Great Basin bristlecone pines grow in the White Mountains of California. These trees can survive for thousands of years. One living bristlecone pine has been aged at more than 5,000 years. That makes it one of the oldest known individual non-clonal organisms on Earth. Think about what that means. This tree began growing thousands of years before the modern world existed, before the Roman Empire, before the Great Pyramid of Giza was completed, before most of the civilizations we associate with ancient history. It was already alive. And unlike an ancient fossil, this tree isn't merely a remnant of the past. It's still growing, still producing needles, still responding to sunlight, temperature, and water. Number 1. The oldest desert. At around 55 million years old, the Namib is widely considered the oldest desert on Earth. And it doesn't look ancient in the way we normally imagine. There are no obvious ruins, no fossils covering the surface, no giant monument marking its age, just enormous dunes, rocky plains, and an environment that appears almost timeless. But the desert has been shaped by an extraordinary combination of geography and climate for tens of millions of years. One of its most remarkable features is fog. The Kolbengula Current runs along the nearby Atlantic coast, helping create coastal fog that can travel inland. In a place where rainfall is extremely limited, that fog can become an important source of moisture, and life has adapted around it. Insects, reptiles, plants, small mammals, entire ecosystems have evolved to survive in an environment that appears almost completely hostile. The dunes themselves are constantly moving. Wind reshapes them, fog changes, temperature swings dramatically. So the Namib isn't literally frozen in time. It has been changing continuously, but the desert environment has persisted for an astonishing length of time, around 55 million years. If you found this video interesting, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps support us and keeps us motivated to bring you more fascinating stories from the past. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.